and Kerry Baker with the Hill and Ponton podcast. Welcome. Glad to have you here today. How are you doing, Kerry?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Carol?
I am great. Great.
Always a good day
We
when
wanted
you.
to start off today with a few of the questions, and then there's some. We decided we were going to tell you things that we have learned that somehow you just don't learn unless you find it in this little secret place that the VA hides things. But we want to wait until more people are on, so we're going to start asking some questions. Nate, if you can pull up some questions for us. I'm 100% permanent and total in TDIU. I was also diagnosed with major depression while in the Navy hospital for 5.5 months, but never told. Can we go back to my discharge, or is that poking the bear? Kerry, what would you say?
I think you're poking a bear, but it's not really a bear. It's if that claim's not been filed, which doesn't sound like it has been, you couldn't go back to discharge anyway.
Right,
And
so you have to have a claim that was filed.
if you're already 100% permanent and total, uh, is it going to benefit you in reality? It's going to get somebody looking at your case. Uh, I don't know. I just, without knowing more, I'd have to say, man, maybe leave well enough alone on that. But I veer on the protect the vet kind of side of things.
Right, so we need to know how long have you been 100% permanent and total, and did you file a claim all the way back? So there are a lot of things we really don't know to answer this. Yeah, it'd be great if you get all the way back, but we don't want to risk what you have. Next question. This is Brad C. Had colorectal cancer, which resulted in permanent ostomy. It's now a presumptive under PACT Act. Is there a rating for colonoscopy resulting from cancer? This is the only rating that I could find, 38 CFR 7333. Kerry?
Uh, I mean, obviously, if the cancer was active, it would be rated at 100%. But, and I'm going off memory here, so if I'm incorrect, I apologize. But I believe the osteotomy results in you being able to keep that 100%. If you've got to wear a bag and you've got the hole, and I believe that's a criteria. Unless they've changed that, I'm not aware of it. And if it's not 100, it's up there. So yeah, I think you get a pretty good rating off that.
Good. So remember, when you have active cancer, it's at 100%. But once you stop treating and the cancer is in remission, then they're going to reduce you and rate you according to the residuals, such as what's happened here. So when you have active cancer and you start getting collateral problems like fatigue or a voiding problem, you need to make sure that the doctor knows that, so that's all been noted in your file, so that hopefully when you go in remission, you've already documented your case enough that you're going to get a high rating, if not back to 100% for the cancer. Next question. Franz Van. 20 years ago, I was rated 20% for a dysthymic disorder and 10% for tinnitus. 4 years ago, I had a sleep apnea diagnosis. Same symptoms in all three. Need to find a medical evidence to support my claim. Can't find studies saying dysthymia caused sleep apnea. I think I was misdiagnosed. How to reopen claim for dysthymia disorder to sleep apnea, please. Kerry?
Well, that would be like any other secondary claim. If you're already service connected for the dysthymia, then it's a matter of filing a claim for the sleep apnea secondary to the dysthymia and/or as aggravated by it. But yes, at the end of the day, and so filing the claim is that's kind of the straightforward part. You need a 526 if you've never filed for the sleep apnea before. That's an original claim. If it has been filed before and it's denied, it's not on appeal, you can do that with a supplemental claim, which is an 0995. But at the end of the day, you are going to need a medical opinion linking one to the other. And there's no easy way to do that. You might get lucky in a VA opinion. I would not count on that. The sleep apnea
No.
as the one type of opinion that all of the examiners across the spectrum, no matter who they work for, seem to all opine the same way. And that's not a coincidence in my opinion. But yeah, you're going to have to get a medical opinion that's going to link that, and that's going to require some footwork on your behalf. Talk to your doctors, and you know. But any other advice on that, Carol?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and we try to tell everybody this is a claim you're not going to win at the regional office. I think I've won one out of I don't know how many I have. I think they are directed by the regional office not to approve these claims. It's like Kerry said, how can all of these different examiners throughout the whole country come up with the exact same opinion when you have lots of doctors who have medical literature to support this claim? So don't give up, but don't count on winning at the regional office. I would go ahead if you get the nexus, the opinion, file your claim. If you're denied, then go ahead and go to the board because you're not going to win at the regional office. This is BD Chend 1, denied for PTSD in 2013, diagnosed on active duty in 2007 after 14 months in combat. Appealed and was rated at 70%, January 2022, now at 80%. How do I get PTSD back pay to 2013? What do you think, Kerry?
I have a theory.
Okay.
Well, it would help to know why you were denied in 2000. Let's see, you were denied in 2013, diagnosed on active duty in 2007. Okay. So I'm assuming you got granted later at that point, January 2022. So why did you get denied when you first filed the claim? All right. One, when did you get off active duty in relation to your claim? And if they said it was because you didn't have a stressor, which would surprise me with 14 months in combat, but it would not completely surprise me.
No.
Look what we're talking about here. If that's why they denied you, rather than that you didn't have a diagnosis, that's an error, because there's a general counsel opinion out there, and I do not have the number off the top of my head. It's been around for a long time, 20 plus years, that addresses a diagnosis of PTSD while on active duty. And it basically comes down to this. It's like anything else that occurs while on active duty. As long as it didn't exist prior to service and it wasn't due to willful misconduct, it's direct service connection, right? And in other words, the stressor requirement that you normally see in PTSD claims goes away if the PTSD is diagnosed on active service. You're not trying to link it to service to a specific stressor. It's diagnosed on active service, just like depression or anxiety or broken leg, right? And the general counsel has addressed that on point. So if that's why they denied it, I would write that up as a clear and unmistakable error. Now, if they said when you filed the claim you didn't have the diagnosis, then now the raters are going to have something to fall back on. So it really depends on why they denied that in 2013.
And it also depends on, we don't really know. This could be a claim that's been continuously appealed. If it has, of course, yes, you can go back. But it looks like we don't really know, and we need a little more information. But if you've had this continuously appealed, you can definitely appeal for an earlier effective date. And that's one of their great tricks is you file a claim and 7 years later they grant it for you, but they grant it as of that effective date. So I hope we'll be able to answer it. If you can give us a little more information, we may be able to give you a better answer.
You'd be amazed how many VA employees are unaware that that particular general counsel opinion even exists.
This is Traveling Wilbert. Have you ever received an opinion from the VA in less than 3 months? Yes. How about you? But it just depends.
Sure. Yeah. Especially here lately with the AMA. Yeah, that's not uncommon at all.
And usually they're not favorable, I have to say. If my father, a Vietnam vet, 30% PTSD, had 2 strokes, and he lost the use of his left side with high blood pressure. What SMC is that? What is the best way to get SMC? So I guess, Kerry, we're assuming he's service connected for the PTSD and the strokes and high blood pressure. We're not told. We're going to assume that he's service connected for all of that. And your only question is, if he's lost the use of his left side, what SMC would that be? But then we don't know what is his total rating.
Yeah.
And you think we can answer this?
Yeah, I think I can.
Okay.
First, I see this 2 different ways. Either he's service, like you said, Carol, he's service connected for the strokes, or he's not. If he's not, okay, under the PACT Act, high blood pressure is now presumptive for Vietnam vets. If you were exposed to herbicide agents and that caused the stroke, then you've got a valid claim there and you can win that. So going to be probably one of those 2 scenarios. But if he has complete loss of use of 2 extremities, that's at least going to put him at SMC L. Okay, that's probably about as close as I can answer that, because without knowing where the loss of use is on each extremity. So, for example, if you have loss of use of both feet, that's SMC L, which is the same as aid and attendance. It's the same pay rate. Okay. But if one of those knees is one of those legs is loss of use above the knee with no natural knee action, that becomes SMC L1/2. If both are above the knee, that becomes SMC M. Okay, kind of the same thing with arms. If it's loss of use of the hand, that's one thing. If it's loss of use with basically no natural elbow action, okay, that could change the SMC level by a 1/2 step. And for example, if it were disarticulated at the shoulder, that would change it again. But you're at least looking at SMC L for loss of use of one hand and one foot. It depends on, from there, the level of loss of use. What else could change that is, you said he's 30% for PTSD. Is that his only rating? Right? Because if he's rated 50% or more apart from the loss of use, that's going to get him an additional 1/2 step under a regulation called 3.350 F3, subsection F3. If another big if, say he's got a single 100% for something else, say the PTSD went up to 100%, that would get him a full step. From, if he started at L, he would go straight to M rather than a 1/2 step. That's F4 in that same regulation. F3, F4, 1/2 step, full step. So that's that's about the best rundown I can give you off the top of my head.
And Kerry, the first thing that would I think about is he getting aid and attendance? I mean, if he's lost the whole use of his left side, he's clearly, and that's service connected, he's clearly rated to aid and attendance. So if he gets that and he already has the SMCL, how does that help him?
Well, that's something you have to be careful with. Now, let's say he didn't have complete loss of use. All right. There may be loss of use of one of those extremities and partial loss of the other. Your best route there may be to go for aid and attendance, because that's going to get you to the L.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have loss of use of both extremities, it might not get you to SMCL. Okay. So aid and attendance would be better. However, if you know there's loss of use of both extremities, which is going to equal at least the rate that's equal to aid and attendance, a lot of times they will shortchange you, not on purpose, by a 1/2 step or a full step, by giving you aid and attendance based on the loss of use, rather than giving you SMC based on the statutory loss of use. All right, because aid and attendance is not going to go to L1/2. It's just going to go to L. But if one of those extremities is completely paralyzed from the hip down, you got no natural knee action, that's going to send you above the L rate. And I've seen this all the time. It looks like a good rating, and it is, but they missed a 1/2 step. That's a few $100s a month, or maybe they missed a full step. that's now you're getting a pretty big difference there. So it's just something to watch out for. If you're looking at an SMC code sheet, it's what they do the aid and attendance on. If it's more than one level of loss of use, then I want to see if they're entitled to a higher rate. Now, let's keep something in mind. If they didn't include the PTSD and say they gave them aid,
They didn't do what with the PTSD?
let's say they didn't include the PTSD, but gave them aid and attendance based on the extremities rather than based on loss of use, and the PTSD were rated 50% or 100% separately from the aid and attendance, that still will get you that half step or full step under F3 or F4. But a lot of times they would group everything in there under aid and attendance, and that would prevent you from getting that half step. A lot of times, if you've got two or more extremities that you have loss of use on, most of the time it's better to get the SMC based on the loss of use rather than the aid and attendance, because there's usually a half step in there or a full step that you might be missing out on.
Mm-hmm. And talking about SMCs, we were talking about the most difficult part of the VA law to understand. And Kerry is our lawyer's lawyer that we call to ask all of these questions because he really knows his stuff.
Don't ask me why. I don't know.
We don't have a life, Kerry. That's it.
That's right. I'm a geek, and I actually find VA regs kind of interesting.
Love the videos. Thank you. If I have a static condition and file a secondary to it and improved, would the new condition be static as well automatically? No, right?
Not necessarily. No.
No. I am rated 90% for Agent Orange conditions, and now the PACT Act added 2 more. One of them is hypertension. I was denied for hypertension in the past. Why do I have to file a claim again?
Because VA is not going to do it for you.
That's right.
I mean, if you're asking about if you're familiar with NEMR, things like that, yeah, NEMR in the past, when new conditions were added, required VA to go out and find who was denied. There is a clause in the PACT Act that successfully, after almost 30 years, probably more than 30 years, successfully killed NEMR in relation to the PACT Act disabilities. Okay, VA does not have to go out and find the people that were denied. You have to come in and file a claim, and odds are it's only going to go back to August of 2022. You're not going to get a NEMR effective date unless you're a surviving spouse.
Yes.
That's a different animal altogether. We won't get into that unless we have a surviving spouse on the line. But that's why you have to come in and request. And it's just a matter of filing an 0995. We're not talking heavy lifting here. So yeah, that's why.
Based on the mighty information you provide in these great Q&Es, I almost finished my request form for higher level review for a VA decision that granted SMC L1.5, but in its reasons for the decision, the rater clearly quoted the examining doctor saying, I have separate disabilities that each on its own justify aid and attendance. Is the fact the rater only granted SMC L1.5 and not R1 Q?
Good question.
Yeah.
So I interpret that, if I remember what you said in the first half, Carol, that's on appeal. Okay?
Yes, it looks like it. I would hope.
Anytime, and I mean anytime, that you can appeal something directly, all right, do not allege Q.
Yes.
Because you don't have to. When you allege Q, you're raising the legal bar as high as it gets.
Right.
Okay? Whereas if you just appeal the rating, right, they don't have to find Q in order to fix the rating. So now, if you looked at this 3 years from now and there was no appeal, yeah, you would have to file a Q in order to get them to fix that. Okay, but don't set yourself up with a higher legal standard than you need to. And so a regular appeal is the way to go on something like that. So,
Remember, Q is clear and unmistakable error. That is a hard task. That's a hard level to reach. Most VA claims it's as likely as not, which is a great for the veteran. But you don't want to do Q unless you absolutely have to. I agree with you, Kerry.
and 99% of the time, they're not going to just openly grant R1.
No.
Regardless of how clear it is, all right, we have to fight for R1 in almost every case. In fact, I don't think I've ever not had to fight for R1, regardless of how clear it was. So you're talking a high benefit there. It's always going to be a large retro. That's going to be in other people's eyesights. That rater doesn't want that. Could be a quality error. There's all kinds of reasons that rater's afraid to do that. That we could do a separate video on that altogether.
Yes. How can I get a diagnosis removed from my record? Not just a 0% rating. I can't say that. But removed. I believe I was misdiagnosed. I really don't know. Do you know, Kerry?
Ooh, yeah. 0% misdiagnosed. I guess it depends on what you mean by removed from the record. Odds are you're not going to get it removed historically from the record, but that doesn't mean you get it corrected going forward. That's just a claim like any other claim, probably. But if you're 0% for cyclothymia, I guess, and you wanted to say, look, I take this 0% back, take this service connection. Now you're getting into renouncement of benefits. You got to be real careful there. You can't renounce part of your benefits. You can renounce all of them. Don't communicate to VA like that's what you want to do. They'll be like, oh, you want us to take all your benefits away? Okay. But I would file a claim if you got medical evidence showing that was a misdiagnosis, and file the claim for what the current diagnosis is and write the VA letter with the claim saying, hey, here's, I was misdiagnosed. Here's the correct diagnosis. I want service connection for the correct diagnosis. And I think that's the way I would do something like that. It doesn't have to be any more complicated.
Right. And as Kerry says, nothing prior is going to be corrected. It's only going to be the foregoing. So it's always going to be showing in these past documents. Any update to the potential changes in mental health ratings? No, I haven't. No.
No, not yet.
Nope. Claim was filed November 25th, 2022. Now pending decision. Is this normally good news or bad news? There's no way to tell.
It's just news.
Yeah. Until you get it, you don't know.
Yeah, it's just a stage of the claims process.
Yeah.
You want it pending a decision. And that's what is that? 2.5, 3 months. That's not
pretty normal.
That's not out of the ordinary.
Yeah. Do multiple claims get combined when filed at once? Slow it down? Currently, I have one pending and want to submit a couple more. I know what my position is. What's yours?
I could go on this one. Here's the thing: if you have multiple claims to file, multiple issues, all right, multiple disabilities, file them all at once.
Please.
Yes.
Please.
Piecemeal this stuff together. Look here. But at the same time, if you've got one pending and you've got a valid other claim to file, go ahead and file it. Okay. Some people will say, no, wait till this one gets done. Well, yeah, you're blowing your effective date. They can do these things in isolation. But the problem is, in today's world, in the Appeals Modernization Act, you get decision after decision after decision in the file. It starts getting hard to review all of that and put all the pieces together. We're pretty good at putting the pieces together. And some of these things have, a dozen decisions inside of a 2-year period. And it's just not something you used to see. Anytime you can get them all on one, get them all on one. It's not going to slow it down because you have multiple issues in one claim. Okay, but it will complicate things when you start piecemealing claims in at different spots. It just, try to avoid that.
So
What do
file the claims that you feel like you're entitled to right away, file them all together. And if something else does come up that you validly think you have a right to, I would file it because of the effective date. But don't hold off on when. I've seen that so many times, and I don't know who's telling them to do that, but it is not good advice.
Right.
If I get rated and approved for PAC Act presumptive conditions, is there a possibility that I can file for the Gulf War illness since my condition came out of nowhere? I served 94 to 2011. I'm not sure what the question is. Are you?
Well, yeah, you can't file for, I mean, you can file for, the fact that the sky turned green if you want, but, but they're going to say that's not a disability. It's kind of the same thing here. You can't file for a Gulf War illness, okay? Because they're going to say Gulf War illness is not a disability. What is the disability caused by the Gulf War, or that's presumptive from the Gulf War that you're filing for? Is it chronic fatigue syndrome? Is it fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, or a host of other potential things? So yes, you can do both of those. Is if you have an illness that would qualify under the normal Gulf War rules, as long as you were in country, then the Gulf War rules are going to apply to you, just like the PACT Act does. It's kind of two separate things. But if the PACT Act might make it presumptive, it just depends on it. It sounds like you have more than one thing going on.
Right.
So you've got some issues that could be Gulf War related that are not covered under the PACT Act, right? Then I would file for both of them,
Right.
one as a PACT Act and one as a Gulf War related illness. But you just can't file for a Gulf War illness because they're going to say that's like filing for exposure to Agent Orange.
Exactly.
They're going to say, well, that's not a disability. You got to tell us what the disability is.
Exactly. If I am waiting on the results of FTA return by higher level review on 2 claims that could put me at 100%, but I also have a TDIU claim, should I go ahead and file that or wait for the final results on FTAs?
You mean DTAs?
Yeah, I'm not sure what FTA means.
Yeah, they might mean DTA, duty to assist error.
That's what I would think it would be.
FTA return. Yeah, that word return by HLR, that's normally what we see when there's a duty to assist error that's then returned to the supplemental claim lane by the HLR. That's how I would interpret that.
So would you wait or go ahead and file for unemployability?
Some people see that as half dozen one, six of the other. Obviously, if you get 100% and it goes back to your date of claim, that's going to moot out any need for TDIU. At the same time, say it gives you an increased rating that would support TDIU. You've got a year to come in and file for that TDIU, and if VA does their job right, you should get that TDIU effective back to the same date of the claim as long as you weren't working. It usually doesn't work out that way these days, as Carol can say for sure. So I guess it really depends. You're not going to hurt yourself, I don't think, by filing the TDIU claim now. There's even an argument that says you might help yourself if you don't get the 100%. But if you get the 100%, they're going to say TDIU is moot. And in this case, they would be right. A lot of cases, the TDIU has been pending longer than the 100%, and they say TDIU is moot, and when it's not, they got to look at the period prior to the 100%. So it really depends on if you got cancer or something that you think is going to get service connected, it's going to be rated 100. I don't know. I need more facts. What about you, Carol?
I need more facts, but I can tell you the percentage of getting it right on higher level review is maybe 15 or 20, maybe. And so I'd go ahead and file the unemployability because I just don't believe they're going to get it right. And then if they get it right, great. But
Yeah.
I just don't see that from the regional office all that
Yeah,
often.
it's not going to harm the
Right.
claim otherwise.
Diagnosed prostate cancer January 22, which was denied. Filed supplemental June 22 and is still pending. Will it go back to the original date? It should.
Although I would be concerned why it's still pending from June of 2022.
And I would also do an inquiry as to what's going on with the claim.
Yeah, they're doing research for exposure records. I could see it been pending that long because they've got a backlog on that. But otherwise, it shouldn't be pending that long.
No, it shouldn't. Can VA compensation be taxed? Nope. Rated 30% for total fusion of non-dominant wrist. Nerve pain and loss of hand and finger use is more severe after 25 years. What might be the best path toward proving effective loss of hand?
Well, first you got to file for an increased rating. So do that with, well, you need 526. I almost said 0995. But yeah, you're basically filing for an increased rating. And I would put on the 526 that you want an increased rating for your whatever hand it is, what the disability is, to include special monthly compensation based on loss of use. Right. A ton of VA employees out there think loss of use is its own separate claim. It's not. They're supposed to consider any time that the evidence shows loss of use. We appeal all the time because VA didn't address loss of use, and they come back and, well, you didn't file a claim for SMC. Yeah, it's maddening. So,
It is maddening.
Yeah.
And I have to say that, Kerry, I have filed that as just like you said, and they've come back and said you need a separate claim for loss of use. And just because I want the case to move on, I do a separate claim. Whatever they ask, because it's just not worth fighting, having a case sidelined for months.
Yeah, so write it on there in your claim up front. That way, if they don't address it then you go to the HOR, request a conference, point out to the DRO that you requested loss of use. It's right there on the form. They didn't address it. And you'll almost definitely ensure that it gets addressed at that point.
We have been waiting since September 2022 for copies of our CMP exams. Is this normal? I'm not finding this normal. I'm finding that the VA finally is a little better if you just send a letter in asking for a copy of those specific exams. So I would follow up on that. What do you think, Kerry?
Yeah, I would follow up on it. But I mean, I guess it depends on how if they're running it like a normal FOIA.
I see them just write a letter. Please send me a copy of my CMP exams, and they're getting those. If you're asking for the whole claim file, that's going to take a while.
Yeah, now I got a disc with a claims file on it maybe a month ago. It was a case I took about over 3 years ago, and I've since got the file electronically. I told that office head, you can cancel all my request for C files, but I guess this one didn't get canceled. 3 years later, it just shows up. I'm like, wow, it's a good thing I don't really need that record.
It's ridiculous. One of the things we wanted to talk about today was when you do this type of work for a long time, you find what we consider little treasures, things that you wouldn't necessarily know, except you've done it so long, you run across these things. And I was telling Kerry, one of the things that I think is fascinating is if a person has, say, lost a leg, lost below the knee, and that's service connected, subsequently they get a cardiac disease, that is automatically service connected. That's one of the little nuggets that most people don't know, and we want to put that out to you. And Kerry, I think you have some too as well.
Yeah, there's a number of nuggets. Depending on if I can think of them while I'm sitting here. We had a case just here recently where, so most vets out there don't get a copy of the code sheet. Okay. It is important to us. It's behind the rating. Usually it has all the diagnostic codes of what your service connected for.
So the code sheet would go down and give the diagnostic code, where you can find it, the percentage, and the date of the effective date. So like, knee sprain or whatever, it would have the diagnostic code, it would have the rating and the year. That's what we mean by code sheet.
So in this one, we're looking at the current issues, what's on appeal. I looked at the code sheet. This guy had 22 years of service, got out, I think it was 2007. And he had all these conditions that were, because the code sheet would tell you if something's been denied in the past and when the original denial was. And all these conditions had been denied in 2007. He got out of service in 2007. So that tells me he filed a claim well within a year of discharge after 22 years of service, and everything he filed for got denied. That's unusual. Okay. Something's going to get granted after 22 years of service. And instantly I thought, I bet he missed the examination, and went back in the file. Sure enough, he missed the examination. Now, one of the conditions, this wouldn't apply to all of them. One of them was service connected for a back condition. I think he listed it as degenerative disc disease, intervertebral disc syndrome. Thinking, I wonder if he had that. Because if he had that while on active duty or within a year of active duty, that's presumptive under 3.309A, the conditions that occur on chronic conditions that occur on during service or within 1 year after service. So I thought, now, but he missed the exam. So I went through the record. Sure enough, MRI right in service. He had degenerative disc disease, spelled out plain as day. He had serious problems with his back, but he missed the exam. All right. So the rule here is there's a difference if you miss an exam, if you file for an increased rating, or you miss an exam from an original claim. Okay, it's under Title 38 in the Code of Federal Regulations, under 3.655, and there's a paragraph for original and reopen claims, and there's a paragraph for increased rating claims. And if you file for an increased rating and you miss an exam, and you're the one that filed for the increased rating, and VA is going to deny that case, hands down. That's what the reg says. You missed the exam. But on an original claim, such as one coming right out of service, that reg says they have to rate on the evidence of record.
Right.
And on that situation, arthritis, all right, in any of its forms, which degenerative disc disease is one of those, is a chronic condition noted in service records or within a year, depending on the situation. This one was in the service records. And they denied solely because he missed the exam. So they misapplied 3.655, whatever subsection it is, that says you have to rate on the evidence of record, because the evidence of record showed he had a chronic condition on service. The rule was they should have granted service connection. So we're going after that back in 2007.
So tell me exactly, so they will know, how do you handle that? What do you file? How do you proceed?
On that situation, you have to do a motion for revision based on clear and unmistakable error. For misapplication of the law, you have to point out that law, and the facts of the case have to line up. Okay, so if it was a lumbar strain versus it's arthritis, and the arthritis has to be verified, like X-ray, MRI, something like that, then that would change the situation, because a lumbar strain is not considered a chronic condition.
What if they say, and I have one I just finished reading, chronic lumbar strain, all throughout his service medical records?
Well, the problem there is chronic lumbar strain is not in 3.309A.
So there, you have to go with the list of disabilities that are in that.
It helps. It helps if because those are by definition, by regulatory definition, chronic conditions. So if you were diagnosed with that during service, it's going to be real hard for them to say you don't have it after service. just because you
Right.
missed the exam. And the issue here would be service connection. You're not really talking about the rating. They have to go back and rate the case as it would have been had they done it correctly back then. Now they might come out, probably will on this case if they'll probably deny it, but at the local level, but they'll probably come out and say, oh, we will grant it 0%. But on a clear and unmistakable error, you can then go back and challenge that rating, and try to get an increase from 2007 in that
So
case.
arthritis, it should be a minimum of 10%, right?
If there's pain, right, if there's pain but full range of motion, that should be at least the minimally compensable rating.
So you'd file a motion for revision and cite.
Based on clear and unmistakable error, and the regulation is 3.655.
And then would you file anything else in addition, like a 0995 or nothing, just that?
It was a good question. So there's no form for motion for clear and unmistakable error, but VA will notoriously miss the claim because there's no form.
Right.
This is maddening. We track every one of these that we file, and we have to go back, and we usually have to communicate to VA that, hey, we filed this claim, you missed it. We put it in big bold letters what it is. You annotated it, you put it in the folder, but you didn't establish the claim. It's a bad problem these days, not just COEs, but so we put it on a 0995.
Exactly.
Just to get them to notice it. Now
Right.
we've had that bite us in the butt too, where they come back and said, that's the wrong form. I put on all my COEs, big administrative note that there is no form for COE. Here's where it says that in your own manual, but we're putting it on this form so you don't miss it. Then they come back and say, you filed it on the wrong form.
I think they have to do so many of those letters a day. Stamped, denied. But
yeah,
okay, that is a great hint, because I have to say, if there's one thing I see over and over and over again, a veteran has a legitimate claim, they get out of the service, they file it, and they miss the CMP exam.
Yeah.
And this way is a wonderful way to go back and see if possibly you can reopen those. Any other hints?
Shoot. Talk about widows.
Okay.
So that's not really a hint on. Well, let me back up and say one thing on reductions or severances. And this is a good hint based on.
So reductions are when you have a service-connected disability and it has a rating, and they're going to reduce the amount of the rating. Severance means they're going to take the service-connected rating away completely. Just so everybody knows.
And I see this all the time. This is a little complicated. It usually gets up to the board level. Let's say you had been reduced 5 years ago, or they severed service connection for a disability 5 years ago, or 2 years ago, or whatever, and you appealed it. All right. Let's say they reduced PTSD rating from 50% to 10%. Right.
Okay.
And you come in and appealed it. And they gave you an exam, or not, either one, and they come back with a rating, and they said a rating higher than 10% is not warranted. All right, they reduced you from 50 to 10, and you say you appeal that up to the Board of Veterans Appeals, and the board says the same thing: a rating higher than 10% is not warranted. As it really it works best when the board has done this. Okay. But it would work at the RO if they denied it on those grounds and there's no longer any appellate time left. Well, that's the COE for current case law, because the issue is not whether you're entitled to a rating in excess of 10%. The issue that you appealed is the propriety of the reduction itself.
Exactly.
The rules there are different. And so the reason the courts have said that's an error is because you can't deprive somebody of due process, and all these reduction rules that are in place are part of due process. And if they say, "Oh, we're not going to give you an increased rating," that's not answering the question. The question is, did you reduce it legally? And if you've already exhausted the vet's appellate time, and you never address the right issue, guess what? He gets that back.
All the way back, and it's right, ongoing. And I think all of us, whenever there's been a severance or reduction, we are pretty inclined to take that because we realize it's probably wrong. And then go ahead, you were talking about the DICs, and this is dependent benefits, usually for widows or widowers.
So and this is more of a good to know, need to know in a lot of situations. The PMCs, or the pension management centers, there's 3 of them in the country. They all the death claims, so to speak, are centralized there. One in Philly, there's one in St. Paul, there's one in Milwaukee, and at least I heard there were still 3 of them. Most of the death DIC and accrued seem to be done at Philly. I don't know why that is, but they're not all done that way. We have seen problem after problem after problem with these PMCs. It's like the last few years they have lost their mind. When it comes to knowing how to adjudicate a DIC or an accrued claim, or an accrued and DIC claim.
So just so people know, DIC is someone, the vet died, and then either his widow or widower or dependent child gets to file for dependent benefits, but they also get to file for accrued. That means if they're ongoing claims, they get to continue those to see if they're awarded and they will get the benefits. So DIC and accrued.
A couple of weeks ago, I found 3 in one day where we had filed proper forms. The claim was established, and in a short time, sometimes the same day, sometimes a few minutes, the claim was canceled. There was no claim pending. And I'm telling you, when there's nothing pending from you filing a claim, VA's got a million plus issues sitting out there in their system. If it's not put under electronic control, they have lost it. Okay. And so we had to communicate with the folks at the PMC, and in fact, one of the cases took multiple communications across offices. Say, look, there's a valid claim that you canceled. We don't know why you canceled it, but you canceled it, and it's valid, and no one will listen to us to try to get this thing reestablished. So that's one problem. There's only one.
Well, how did you know that it was canceled? So how would people out there know?
The people out there wouldn't. I mean, they might if they had access to whatever the claim tracking tool is that you get as a vet. Not everybody has access to it.
Well, if it gets claim closed, could that be, and nothing happens?
It would probably say it's closed on their end. But what I looked in VBMS, I was following up on the claim and realized they had closed it after we filed it. So we just happened to see that. But with us, we could go on for a couple of months thinking they were developing it.
Exactly.
Hadn't got to it yet, not realized they closed it. So that was one of the ways we found it out about it. Another issue with them is a lot of times when a veteran passes away, he's got claims pending or appeals pending. For example, we had one at the board, just saw it last week. The claim was at the board when the veteran died. In those situations, the board dismisses the appeal because there has to be a substitute claimant, and the board has decided that they don't have first instance jurisdiction to substitute even a surviving spouse. Okay, but when that happens, the surviving spouse has to file proper paperwork, and she would typically get substituted in as the claimant. And then once that happens, in a case that was at the board, at least, the RO then reestablishes that appeal and sends it back to the board. And the widow then assumes the claim from where it was at when the board had dismissed it. Okay, so that's kind of how that process should work. Kind of the same thing if you have an appeal pending locally. But there's, the board, it's just the board's not involved in those. Almost half the ones, if not more, of the ones I've seen in the past, few months have come out and said, your benefits, not your benefits, your substitution is denied. We're talking a valid surviving spouse, okay, is denied because there was no pending appeals when the veteran died. First, that's an unlawful ground to deny substitution, okay, just by saying there was nothing pending. You're either qualified for substitution or you're not, and a surviving spouse is qualified for substitution. Whether that results in benefits or not is a different story, but they can't just say, we're not going to substitute you. That's like telling you, you're completely out of luck because we're not even going to look at the merits of the case. We're not even going to let you in there as a claimant. All right. So problem number one, they decide not to substitute her. Problem number two is they say there's no pending claim. And, some of these were denied or the vet died while there was an appeal pending at the board. So it doesn't take much effort, is what I'm saying there, to look at BVMS and see, of course, you got a board decision dismissing the appeal. It's the last thing in the record before the death claim. How do you miss that? And I don't get a little excited, but it fires me up because I see it over and over.
They're not picking on you. They do it to all of us, Kerry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm picking on them. There's one going on right now. I sent an email last night, as a matter of fact. The appeal was the vet. There was no appeal pending when the vet died. He was rated 100% for a couple of different disabilities. He died of cancer. The widow comes in and files for DIC. They denied the widow initially, saying you're not a qualified spouse. In this case, they had a reason for doing that. She had a common law marriage in the state of Texas. State of Texas observes common law marriage. She had it for 22 years. It was an informal certificate by the state of Texas in the file that we had submitted that said that she had a common law marriage. So and VA recognizes common law marriages as long as it's in a state that recognizes them. So enough said. All right, let's get that evidence to them. Show them that she's a qualified spouse. They cancel the claim. Right? They cancel it. It's no claim pending. We had to go back to them and say, what are you doing? You didn't submit new and relevant evidence. Oh, well, then you didn't look at the mountain of stuff that we submitted with the claim. And two, you can't just cancel a claim. Even if there was no new and relevant evidence, you still have to issue a decision saying you're denying it because there's no new and relevant evidence. You don't get to just cancel it. But that's what they did. And so they finally come back earlier this month and go, you're right, the widow is due a decision. Well, thank you. The widow is due a decision. What did they do? They denied it again based on the marriage. All right. We sent a message back, and at this point we're kind of fighting. Right? Like you cannot deny this based on a lack of qualifying marriage, and the people we were communicating with, they weren't giving us the details. And I got a little fired up. I'm like, they said, you're just going to have to appeal it. I said, all right, are you not fixing this because of your production standards? You just don't want to go back and interrupt that and correct the mistake? Or do you really think that this is not a qualified widow? And they come back and they give us some form of answer about, well, it doesn't look like there's wartime service. I said, you know what? And this was last night's email. I said, you're right. There is no wartime service. The vet was in for 83 to 87. But if you think there's wartime service as a requirement, then you're just looking at non-service connected pension. DIC does not require wartime service. Accrued benefits does not require wartime service. And you still denied the case by saying there's no qualified spouse. We can't even get to a merits-based decision on whether she gets DIC until you recognize that she's a valid spouse. And if you think wartime service is a requirement, you're not even reading the form. And I'm saying this has been going on for some time. The things like this. So if you're a widow, my point to all of this is if you're a widow and you've been denied, at this point, I would expect it to be wrong. I would say, and we're talking wrong in ways that most people are not going to be able to get this fixed. Uh, so, you know,
So
I'm,
that's, yeah, for
well,
everybody out there, if you're
I'm,
a DIC, go ahead.
well, I'm interested in those cases, okay? Because widows used to be the
Automatic.
yeah, that was the people you took care of, even more than the vet. And most vets would say, yeah, you screw me over, fine, don't screw my widow over.
Right.
Uh, and that's what's happening nowadays. And it doesn't seem that anybody's doing much to try to fix it.
Yeah.
So I want more of those cases. So,
Kerry
because
is fired up about those. So if you're a DIC, if you're denied, call Kerry. All right. One of the things that we keep getting questions about is what are they doing about the BVA backlog? And that's what I've been asking you to do. I've been asking you to go to your congressman until your senators and ask them what are they doing about it. Kerry and I are 2 votes. You out there are a lot more votes, and they're not going to do anything about it until you get on their case. As far as I know, they're still working on the legacy cases and only doing the emergency AMA cases. So nothing has changed. And you know what? I don't see it changing anytime soon because they've got so many legacy cases. It's going to be another year or 2 before they get through them. And meanwhile, all of these people, all of you are waiting. So what are we doing? We are asking you, call your congressmen, call your senators. Hey, there's an election this year. The people that are running they're gonna want to make you happy. So what you ask them is, what are you doing about the BVA backlog? And I'd like to hear what they have to say. All right, we didn't get a lot of questions done, so let's just go to the next one. My major depressive disorder, that's MDD, claim was denied. The letter said no record of mental health in service. I submitted my medical records that included my diagnosis of adjustment disorder in service. Higher level review, should I ask for an informal conference? Kerry, you want to take that?
yes. All right. I just want to, I had to read it again. Um, yeah, if you had adjustment disorder in service, yeah, absolutely. Well, now I might be
Yeah.
back. If you just submitted those records that showed you had an adjustment disorder in service, they weren't in the file before, and HLR is going to say they can't look at them because they're new evidence. So if they are new evidence and they weren't in the file when the first claim was denied, then I would do a supplemental claim with those records. Uh, but you're talking in service, they should have gotten your service records when they established the first claim. And
Right.
so if that's the case and they did, you would kind of need to know what's in the claims file. Then I would go to an HLR because those records are going to be in the file, and the HLR would have jurisdiction to say, yeah, you guys, you didn't develop the case right, and send it back and make them do that. So
But
really,
one of the things they have to watch out for, adjustment disorder is not the same thing as major depressive disorder. Adjustment disorder we find often in the service because it means like a temporary thing. You're temporary adjusting to changes. And so you need to tie this up with the major depressive disorder too. And maybe have your doctors talk about when it really started. It wasn't a temporary thing.
or get evidence saying it's a chronic adjustment disorder.
Right.
Because they can be chronic, but a lot of, you're right, Carol's right, a lot of people look at them as a temporary issue.
Yeah. Is urinary incontinence and urinary frequency separate rating? Urinary incontinence and urinary frequency separate ratings? No.
No, now they're gonna rate the higher.
Right.
Those are all rated under avoiding dysfunction. Um, Typically, the incontinence, depending on the severity, is going to get you a higher rating than the frequency. Not all the time though. It just depends which one's worse. And what do you think? I see the frequency at nighttime has more of an effect on than daytime.
It just depends on whether they also have to have pads they have to change and how often they change the pads. Remember, if you change the pads 4 times or more a day, that's a really high rating. So if you have that problem, you need to call the VA and ask them to send you pads as a way of proving that you have to do that. But you can be rated for how many times you get up during night, or you can be rated how often during the day, how many, once every hour or whatever, you have to go to the bathroom. Whichever of those would give you the higher rating. I just had an MRI done at the VA, diagnosed with brain atrophy, brain loss that appears abnormal. I flew in and walked behind C-130s as an aeromedical tech. Is this JP fuel exposure? I flew in and walked behind C-130s as an aeromedical tech.
I would ask a couple of more questions. Did you serve in the Gulf at any point after 1990, up to the present? I've seen claims like that from Gulf War veterans, and they got them service connected successfully. Especially if it's just brain atrophy and there's no diagnosis tied to it as to why it's there. I'm not sure about the jet fuel.
I'm not either.
I mean, we get Parkinson's and things like that service connected secondary, as long as you can show that there's benzene or some some kind of toxin exposure. It's usually solvents. So whether brain atrophy could be something like that, I'd have to ask a doctor.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure how much exposure you had to this fuel. Flying in it, I don't think is necessarily going to be as much. And walking behind, I'm not sure. Do you just walk behind in order to get in? I think we need a little more information, really, to know where you are on that. But I think the Gulf War is a great way, if you have that, to start. What if you put PTSD secondary to depression? What's the likelihood they will prove it? And how do you get evidence ready for your C&P exam? I think they're trying to get PTSD through depression. But one thing that I like to do, Kerry, is acquired psychiatric disorder. If you went in the service and you had no mental problem, whether it was PTSD or depression, but you came out with a mental problem, then that's service connected, no matter what name you call it. So if you're trying to get PTSD and you can't prove the stressors or things like that, stop. Go back and just show acquired psychiatric disorder. And all you have to show is you went in the service with no mental problem. When you came out, you had one. And you can do that by people who knew you, parents, cousins, brothers, and sisters. I don't want to play the VA's game of stressor proving and things like that, when you can get it so much easier the other way. Any thoughts, Kerry?
Well, just reading into the question, let's say the depression is already service connected. It sounds like it might be, but if that's the case, I file a claim for an increased rating. What's the PTSD one? They're probably not going to service connect PTSD secondary to depression, like
Right.
those. You got a stressor requirement there, and that's depression is usually a component of PTSD. But if you're already service connected with depression, seek an increased rating. If you've got, now I'm reading between the lines here, if you've got a separate diagnosis for PTSD and you think that would help your rating, it probably won't. And if you think it's hurting your rating by not having it on there, it probably isn't. And that's because if both came up in an examination and the examiner said, well, this one's service connected and this one's not, the next question is can you delineate out the functional effect from each one? It's very rare that a psychologist or psychiatrist will say, yes, I can. It's usually, no, I can't. The symptoms overlap so much that you can't delineate out the functional effects from one versus the other. And as soon as they say that, there's a case called Mitlighter that says, well, then they have to give the entire psychiatric disability and its severity they have to associate it with the one that's service connected. Okay, and so if they're not doing that, then you've got a reason to appeal that, and that would be better than trying to tie the PTSD to the depression. And you know, if I'm making a correct assumption about the case, which I might not be, but I agree with Carol. If you're going to file a claim, yeah, absolutely. Acquired psychiatric condition to include whatever you want to put on there.
You know, Kerry, some of the advice I see on here, I just want to let you know that I don't always agree with.
Yeah.
They will give you, one person was saying they'll only give you service connection for one mental health condition. That's not true. They will give you service connection. They just won't pay for all of them. They will pay for the higher if they're separate. And that's why we like to have them all under one umbrella, acquired psychiatric disorder.
It's funny you mentioned that, Carol. I'll take a little bit of liberty and say this, and hopefully you'll invite me back on still. But a couple of weeks ago, myself and somebody else were on here talking about some similar things, and there was some advice being given on the side by some listeners, and we didn't address it, and it was downright dangerous advice. And so to our listeners, okay, you know, be careful where you get the advice. Some of this I saw, we should have addressed it. We really didn't see the details of it until after the video. You know, that's why we're on here giving the advice. That's why, you know, I know Carol is very detailed about hers, as am I. There's a lot of advice out there that's not correct. You know, you might really believe you're giving the right advice. You know, be careful with that. Just make sure you really know what you're talking about.
Right, because we don't necessarily see all these questions that go up or the things that people are saying. And we're just saying, just because it's put up there, that doesn't mean that it's correct, because we haven't really necessarily looked at it. VA law is one of the most complicated laws there is out there. And it's just amazing. One little fact, one little thing can change the whole decision one way or the other. Got time for a few more questions? My father passed in 2015 from cancer, did not file any claims from his time in service. He is considered a Blue Order vet. Is there anything that I or my mother can claim at this time? And I am assuming the mother was married to the father. What would you say, Kerry?
Definitely for the mother. Yeah. Whether you've got a NEMR involvement there or not, you may or you may not, based on the question. If you don't, the daughter or son, as it might be, is probably it's not going to get anything from a claim. But the mother definitely can, if
as a widow.
As a widow,
right.
For DIC and maybe NEMR related benefits, depending on the facts of the case.
But you can count on the DIC.
Yeah.
Was there a VA duty to assist back in 1996? Denied for service connection for depression, but CMP doctor said it was secondary to my service connection condition. If I get awarded secondary service connection now, I assume that means for depression, should they pay back to 1996? Ooh.
Probably not. VA's duty to
Well, if the CMP doctor said, don't you think they should? Oh, that's, I don't know.
I mean, if it was in the record back then, you know, one, and it was clearly linked, I would say, well, was there a decision that then denied it by overlooking that? If that's the case, then yeah, you could. But if it's not been denied, and if if I get awarded secondary now, you know, in other words, if there was no prior claim, yeah, you might have a hard time getting service connected back to then.
But I'm reading, Kerry, I'm reading it that I don't know for sure, but it looked like he filed for service connection back in 96, and the CMP doctor then said it was secondary to a service connected condition.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So if he gets awarded now, I think there would be some chance to get it back in 96.
Yeah, yeah, I misread that. No, I agree, Carol. If you were denied back then and the CMP doctor said it's related, then I might file an error on that.
Yeah.
But now to answer another question, was there a duty to assist back in 96? Yes and no. There was a duty to assist. Technically, a duty to assist is not going to help you in this situation, all right? Because if they got an exam for you back then they did assist.
Mhm.
It's the rating they got it wrong, all right? But they didn't have the duty to assist like they do now. The Veterans Claims Assistance Act of 2001 is what gave us the current duty to assist. Prior to that, you had to submit what's called a well-grounded claim, all right, before VA then had a duty to assist. And that was a lot of fights back then because
Yes.
what's a well-grounded claim? I mean, there was it's very subjective. So one rater would say, no, it's not a well-grounded claim. Uh, and the next one would say, yeah, it is. As soon as they say it is, they have to give an exam and normal duty to assist. There was a lot of claims denied prior to 2001 by VA asserting, no, your claim's not well-grounded. Um, that
That was
wouldn't help.
pretty awful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that wouldn't help you in this situation here. You would need to file probably a CUE to get it on the decision that denied it back in '96.
Right. So what probably they would appeal this decision,
But yeah,
asking
sure.
for an earlier effective date and pointing that out.
Uh-huh.
Nate, couple more. They closed my 22 item claim I've had since May. I called them 3 times before they'd send me a note to the regional office to investigate. Anything I should do in the meantime?
Mm. Uh, Without knowing more facts, it's hard to answer that. I mean, if they closed it incorrectly, and that's been brought to someone's attention, they should just reestablish it. Uh, I would want to know why they closed it, if there was a reason. We've seen some that have closed and no apparent reason. Um,
Yeah.
I, yeah, I need a little bit more information there. But is the investigation still ongoing? How long ago did you hear about the investigation? If it's been a number of months, we're not talking about something that should take a number of months. If
Right.
somebody in that case and go, yeah, this was closed incorrectly, let's reestablish it. That takes 10 minutes. If you've got a VA employee that actually looks at it and realizes it was done incorrectly. Um, so yeah,
So I'm with you. I wouldn't wait too long after this. I'd give them a month maybe, but if you aren't getting a CMP exam or a decision or something, I'd look into it again.
yeah, and you may have to refile the claim and then argue the effective date later. Based on the previous claim that it was closed incorrectly.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do that if they're not acting on the claim I have filed. I'll go ahead and file a new one so they can tell me there's already one there and then maybe process it.
Here's one thing: if you got a copy of the claim that was filed, especially if it's got VA stamp on it, and you refile that particular one, because then you can show, look, VA had this valid claim. Here's proof that VA had it. We don't know why you canceled it, but here's the paperwork again. And this,
Right.
so you got the claim again and the proof that it was filed, however long ago.
Last one. I am being medically retired, PDRL, in March. Currently 90% VA, though I'll fight for the last 10%. What are some of the things I can do to ensure I never get reduced? I hear people randomly get reduced. I don't think it's randomly. It's an ongoing process by the VA. You can count on it on almost every case. So
Yeah,
what would you suggest?
it's not random.
No.
I mean, they can't just, all of a sudden 1 month your check is lower than. They have to give you due process notice, 60 days on a proposal, then another 60 once they do the final. So if they don't do all that, by court law, the reduction's supposed to be void. So,
But Kerry, that's what I see. The first thing the VA tries to do is reduce it. They'll send you out for a C&P exam and you will have miraculously gotten much better.
so let's just say your fight is successful and you get the other 10% and you're 100%. Um, is it, I would want to know, is it static? Is the VA going to re-examine you in the future? If not, if they give you a decision that say it's 100 and they say, dependence, educational assistance is established, that means they're making it permanent, and permanent in total. If that happens, don't file any more claims. That's probably the easiest way. Now, if they decide that, look, this guy's out of service, he's young, this disability just doesn't appear static to us. We need to re-examine it in 3 years down the road. There might not be anything you can do about that. Just be prepared to have that examination down the road.
Well, Kerry, I think that they should continue to go to their doctors and
Yeah,
complain about all the problems so that the medical records show that you have not gotten better at all. And then if they try to reduce you, you could make sure that you point that out at a higher level review, that this doctor who saw me for 10 minutes said this, but look at my medical records that show that. So I would make sure that I would keep going to the doctor until I get that permanent and total, and
yeah,
complaining every time I go about the problems I have.
yeah. And if you get a letter saying they're proposing to reduce, um, you might not want to fight that on your own. Um, I mean, those can be complicated. So get a good rep, in other words, that knows how to deal with reductions.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. It's always a pleasure being with you, and thanks everybody out there. Good luck, and I hope you get some good decisions this week. Bye.